This is the Palin Update on SaraNet Radio. I'm Kevin Scholla.
It is corrupt. It is frustrating. It is why Americans are saying, no more, enough is enough. We're going to turn this thing around.
As Washington continues to run wild with little care for we the people, our friend Peter Schweizer has a red-hot new book out exposing more of the corruption and deceit from our so-called leaders. The book is called Extortion: How Politicians Extract Your Money, Buy Votes, and Line Their Own Pockets. And the author, Peter Schweizer, is here today to talk all about it. Sarah Palin gives Schweizer's book a rave review. Palin responds to anti-gun activist Piers Morgan, recognizing Down Syndrome Awareness Month, a brand new Commonwealth Common Sense with Susan Stimson, and just ahead our latest edition of Steel Resolve with Sarah Steelman. Now we bring in Peter Schweizer. He is the president of the Government Accountability Institute, a nonprofit research institution dedicated to investigating and exposing cronyism, government corruption, and misuse of taxpayer money. And he does that in a big way in his new book, Extortion: How Politicians Extract Your Money, Buy Votes, and Line Their Own Pockets. Peter Schweizer, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's a delight. I'm glad to be on with you.
You know, I remember speaking to you about Throw Them All Out early in 2012, and, well, here we are again, and things have actually worsened in D.C., it seems, and your new book, the title just so powerful, Extortion, that's what is happening, right? Politicians extorting wealthy industries and donors.
That's right. It begins with the president, but it also includes people from both parties in the House and in the Senate. And what they're basically doing is threatening companies and industries that bad things are going to happen to them. It could be at the federal level where the president and the Department of Justice are threatening legal action, maybe even criminal charges against companies. Then those companies get solicited for donations. And it could mean at the legislative level where bills are introduced that are designed specifically to sort of raise concern or fear in an industry, and then those industries are expected to pony up to make the bill go away.
You know, regular Joes go to prison for extortion. That's why this word, I think, is such a buzzword for so many, and that's the question I've got from so many people who've taken a look at your book, or even just at the title. They say, why is it Washington can play by other rules?
Well, that's right. I mean, this is the perennial problem. The example that I use is used to be American cities, at least in the Northeast, were plagued by the so-called squeegee men. And these were men that, would walk with a squeegee, or they'd have a towel in one hand and they'd have a brick in the other, and they'd come up to your car at a stoplight and say, "Let me wash your window." and it was pretty clear if you didn't, they were going to take that brick and slam it into your windshield. Well, that was dealt with because that was extortion. And it was never explicitly said, "Give me money or I'm going to smash this into the windshield," but everybody knew what it meant, and it was seen as extortion. It was dealt with. The same thing happens in D.C. They don't have to be as explicit as to say, "Give us money and we'll make this go away," but everybody knows that's exactly how the game is played. And I interviewed a number of, former executives, former president of Shell Oil, former chief operating officer of Microsoft, and others who said this is the way the game's played. You're expected to hire certain lobbyists. A lot of times they're family members of Congress, and you're expected to make donations or raise money for them. And if you don't, you're going to have heck to pay, and it's going to be a serious problem for you.
You know, that's a great analogy. I remember the squeegee guys in New York City. I also remember my grandfather never liking them very much, and then he also didn't like many politicians, so I guess that does make a lot of sense. But you mentioned all these big dogs that you talked to here. Were you surprised that you had people be so candid with you for the book? I mean, there's some really ugly things going on here when it comes to fundraising.
Yes, well, no, this is interesting. So I talked to people that are currently in corporations, and none of them would talk to me. The only people that would talk to me were the people that had left. They're done. They don't have to deal with the government anymore. They're retired. They're, in a sense, in that way, untouchable because they don't have a business they're trying to run. They are retired and no longer active. And they were willing to be very, very candid and describing the sort of techniques, whether it's milker bills, whether it's sort of the toll booth that John Boehner and others use. They were able to talk about it precisely because they felt like, okay, they can't really retaliate directly against me, so I can talk about it. But people within industry itself right now, forget it. None of them wanted to talk on the record about this.
So not only do politicians not act like us as far as getting away with things regular folks could never get away with, but you go as far as to compare them to the mafia. Similar deal with a pecking order and threats, etc.?
Absolutely. I think the mafia analogy is a very good one. They certainly don't, say they're going to commit physical violence, but they are going to threaten financial or economic violence against people. And they use the same techniques. I mean, protection money. You've heard about a protection racket where, a couple of tough-looking guys come into your business and they say, hey, look, we'd hate to see somebody want to burn this place down. We offer security. We'll make sure that doesn't happen. And, so you have to pay this guy protection to make sure they don't burn down your place. That goes on all the time with businesses where politicians say, introduce a bill. They're called milker bills. A milker bill has nothing to do with the dairy industry. It's all about milking donations and milking contracts for family members and buddies who are lobbyists. And so a bill is introduced that scares the daylights out of a company. The company quickly learns that they can make this go away, but to make it go away, they're going to have to cough up a lot of money. And they cough up the money, and lo and behold, the bill goes away. Well, that is really just a more sophisticated form of the extortion racket that we talked about earlier. It's just that the culprits in this case are wearing suits, and they happen to be on television in Washington, D.C.
Well, when you lay it out like that, you would think that anybody who actually listens or realizes this would just be absolutely appalled. I think that's why the book is so important. We talk about low-information voters with some of these candidates that we find elected. I think you could say the same just low-information citizens in general. We have to get this type of information because anyone, with half a brain would hear this and you would think would do what you said in your other book, throw them all out, right?
Yes, exactly. And this is the thing. We are used to thinking about the relationship between, outside interests, whether they are labor unions or corporations. We're used to thinking about that in terms of bribery and that kind of analogy. And, that does go on. They try to entice these members. But we really do a disservice if we think that's all that's going on. That same transaction takes place where people on the outside are sending money to Washington, D.C., but it's not bribery, it's extortion. They are put into a position where they have to do it. And there was a survey done a couple of years ago that surveyed corporate executives, and over half of them said that the main reason that they gave money to candidates was because they feared, that was their word, they feared that if they didn't, bad things would happen to them and to their industry. And so that, to me, speaks more of extortion than it does bribery. And it shows that the power equation, it's really the politicians and the bureaucrats that have the upper hand and hold all the cards compared to the outside interests, at least in a lot of cases.
What did you think of Sarah Palin's take on this book? She said you have to wonder whether we really have government of the people, by the people, and for the people, when the only way we the people can be heard is if we grease the palms of the ruling class. True? And if so, how do we change that?
No, she is absolutely correct. And, this is what she battled in Alaska when she was governor. There was a group of cronies that were running Alaska. It was the same kind of situation, and she went in and fought them and pulled them out trunk and root completely. In order to deal with this, we need to do, I think, a couple of things. We've got to change the culture of Washington, D.C. We've got to decentralize power. As long as you have a circumstance where in Washington they are able to send out billions, tens of billions of dollars to various people where they are in a position where they can damage and in fact destroy companies and industries, you're going to have this kind of extortion take place. So we've got to decentralize power. And then finally, we've got to change the equation. Right now, the reason they have these long congressional sessions where nothing gets done is because they are able to be in session and fundraise at the same time. And nothing brings in the money more than the legislative session taking place and the fear that something can happen in that building next to you that's going to hurt you. So what I propose is we do in D.C. what we've done in at least 27 other states, Florida where I live and others, where the law says that you cannot, as a member of the legislature, solicit or receive campaign contributions while the legislative session is taking place. So it would really force them in D.C. to become much more efficient with their time because they'd want to go off and fundraise. And it would get rid of at least some of the threat or the fear that they have that something bad is going to happen to them when they're being solicited. And I think those are two big reforms, along with term limits, which I think would be enormously helpful.
And you mentioned this a little bit earlier. This is both parties. I mean, we've heard John Boehner and other names come up, and, of course, the media doesn't help either.
No, that's right. This is something the media doesn't seem to be interested in. I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, we want to think of them as a watchdog. They're more like a lapdog because, let's be honest about it. They're interested in advancing their careers. That comes down to access. That comes down to social relationships, getting invited to the right parties. So there are some, but there are very few that really want to take on the D.C. establishment. And then I think when it comes to the political parties, I believe it's human nature. And when you create an incentive system in D.C. that encourages corruption, that encourages self-enrichment, you're going to get that. And it's not just a question of, well, let's put somebody else in there. Unless you change the underlying culture, you're going to keep getting the exact same result. And it doesn't matter a whole lot whether it's one party or the other, because, again, whether they have a D or an R after their name, they're human beings, and they are going to be tempted by the same things, and they're going to be prone to the same behaviors.
I like that. So we have to add something here. We need to throw them all out in 2014, but replace them with not the same kind of folks.
Yes, that's exactly right. And we need to have fundamental reform, and I think we need to get rid of professional politicians. I mean, if you have term limits in place that prevent people from staying there for 20 years, it becomes very, very hard to extort because just by the time you're starting to get comfortable, it's time for you to leave. And I think that's a good thing.
How can people get the book, Peter?
It's available on Amazon.com or bookstores around the country, and it's available on Kindle or the old-fashioned way, which is the way I read my books. And I just would appreciate people could also go to politicalextortion.com. It tells a little bit about what's going on and how we're trying to fight this.
Peter, it's so important to get this message out, and you did a fabulous job once again. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's called Extortion, How Politicians Extract Your Money, Buy Votes, and Line Their Own Pockets by Peter Schweizer. The book's available everywhere. And for more on the Government Accountability Institute, head to gai.org. In Sarah Palin's review of the book, she writes, it's time for Washington to stop threatening citizens and scaring up dollars through an endless extortion scheme of manufactured crises. It's time for leaders to lead. That means doing right by voters without requiring them to pay protection money in advance. Palin goes on to say, enough is enough. If the permanent political class won't drain the swamp, we will. We should follow the advice in the title of Schweizer's last book and throw them all out. 2014 is just around the corner. Palin took it to radical Second Amendment opponent Piers Morgan this past week after Morgan cowardly tweeted out a Daily Current story attacking Sarah Palin, even though the story was fake. Well, Palin responded saying, oh, dear Piers, thank you so much for all your invitations to appear on your shambolic show, including the adoring message you sent, but is it still any wonder why I've politely responded that I'm too busy doing, pretty much anything to accept the invite? At least I didn't tell you to get stuffed. And to all our British friends, we ask, what did your friends across the pond ever do to deserve your Piers? Well, Palin also included a picture of her bear hunting with the inscription, Piers, kind of busy right now. For Down Syndrome Awareness Month, Palin posted some great pictures of her son Trig, and she wrote, I'm grateful for those with a heart of love, for those who have that extra chromosome. We refer to it as an extra chromosome of love. To see any of the governor's posts in their entirety, visit Sarah Palin's Facebook page or follow her on Twitter at Sarah Palin USA.
It's time for Commonwealth Common Sense with Susan Stimson and Kevin Scholla.
Hey, Susan, welcome back.
Thank you, Kevin. It's nice to be here.
So you want to talk today about an approach from politicians that you've noticed. We've talked about a lot of the corruption in D.C. and a lot of the cronyism and extortion, as Peter Schweizer puts it in his new book. But you've noticed even on local levels, some people not playing fair, shall we say.
Yes, I would agree, and it's not just at the local level, but I'm watching what's happening in Virginia, and it's something that is happening nationwide that we saw President Obama do. It's a strategy that the Democrats have that's working quite effectively for them. I happened to be watching TV last night around 7:30 p.m., and the commercials that play are just brutal on the attacks Republicans on women and making them think that if you vote for a Republican, every single choice that you have as a woman is going to be taken away from you. And from my standpoint, when I watch that, I will think, well, what woman is really going to believe that? But I can tell you, as I campaign and as I knock on doors, there are women that are hearing this message over and over and over again, and they do ask me. They'll say, well, you're a woman, you're a Republican, and I'm hearing this. Is this true? So it's definitely a strategy that they have taken. It's a formula, and they use it over and over again, that if you vote for Republican, all birth control pills will be taken away from you, or whatever the issue is. Anything but the real substantive issues of taxes, the role of government, what's happening in education. And then the question is, where do we go from here? How do we, as Republicans, respond to this and pierce through just the formulaic attacks that the Democrats are doing?
So this is really those Saul Alinsky tactics that we've heard so much about and that have been perfected by so many, unfortunately, in politics. This, straight out lying, but if you say it enough, people will tend to believe it, and at the same time demonizing your opponent instead of trying to just talk about differences on issues.
It's a message that they have the money, and in Virginia, the millions of dollars that are rolling in that are from out of state. In reality, Ken Cuccinelli and Terry McAuliffe have raised an equal amount of Virginia money, but the amount of money that is pouring in from out of the state and the messaging anywhere from gun control to abortion. That's pretty much what you can sum up is the message of the Democrat Party. And one of the other TV ads I saw, I was just appalled, but it was about gun control, and as they started it, they showed pictures of the murderer in the Virginia Tech massacre and the murderer from the massacre of the school in Connecticut, and equating that to Republicans and just appealing to those visceral emotions that really have nothing to do with the policy that limits our freedom. So from the standpoint of Republicans, we're going to have to figure out how to push back on these thug tactics.
Politics has always seen some bending of the truth, if you will, or trying to paint opponents in a different light. We've seen this forever, but I think you're making great points here of this is just extreme, even from 10, 15 years ago, where there are flat-out lies told, and you have the backing of a lot of the media. You have the backing of others that want you to win. And then, like you said, you knock on someone's door, and a woman who heard this believes this stuff and puts it against you.
Well, and from my standpoint here at the local level, it's something that can be pierced through because these are your neighbors. These are people that you see day to day, so they know you. But I did shop in the grocery store yesterday, and there was an older woman who lived in a very, an old neighborhood that ran into me, and she said, what is going on with the Republicans in Virginia? They want to take away every choice that a woman has. Now, this is a very solid Republican female that supports me, that I know, but that messaging is piercing through. And I think at some point, Americans and the citizens, they're really going to have to say, all right, enough is enough. I really need to look at this a little more deeply and look at the issue itself.
And perhaps Republicans need to take the gloves off and call them out on it every single time it happens, whether it's in an ad or on something said in a debate, and go at it, like a Governor Palin would, like a Ted Cruz would, not like, say, a McCain or a Romney would.
In my opinion, that would be the response that I would have. I would simply turn it back on them, that we're going to have to, as a party, unite around this and push back on these tactics. But right now, it's working.
All right, Susan, sounds good. And happy Halloween to your kids and you.
That's great, and I will talk to you next week.
Susan Stimson in Virginia. More Commonwealth Common Sense next week. Now, our weekly commentary, Steel Resolve. Here's Sarah Steelman.
Thanks, Kevin. We are deep into the football season, and I keep thinking about the old adage, the best defense is a good offense. Since I'm a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan, I'm a little worried if that is actually true. The Chiefs have an awesome defense this year, full of playmakers. Maybe we will know if that's really true when the Chiefs play the Broncos next month. A lot of pundits are saying it about the Republicans as well. We need a good offensive strategy. In other words, we need to say what we are for instead of railing about what we are against. Many prognosticate that if we stay on defense, so to speak, we won't win back the presidency in 2016. However, in football, statistics actually support the fact that both good offensive and good defensive teams have won about the same percentage of games. Tobias J. Moskowitz and I, John Wortham, in a post on Freakonomics, calculated that in 10,000 regular season games, the better defensive team has won 66.5% of the time, compared with 67.4% of the time for the better offensive team. You know what I think? I think it's the team with the playmakers that do the best. We Republicans could use some better offense for sure, but if Republicans are going to make a strong national comeback in 2016, they need to do less talking and take more action. We need playmakers. When my boys played football, they played both ways. I yelled at them like a crazy mother from the sidelines, make something happen. Be a playmaker. Maybe if we shout loud enough, too, they will hear us in Washington. This is Sarah Steelman for SarahNet Radio.
Tune in again next week for another segment of Steel Resolve right here on the Palin Update. The Palin Update, including Commonwealth Common Sense and Steel Resolve, is on demand and available for download. So just head to SarahNetRadio.net, pick the show you want to hear, and you can listen anywhere, anytime. Well, that'll just about do it for this edition of the Palin Update on SarahNet Radio. Visit SarahNetRadio.net for continuing coverage of Governor Palin. Also, follow along on Twitter at SarahNet Radio, at Kevin Scholla, at Susan B. Stimson, and at Sarah_Steelman. We're on Facebook, too, so be sure to like SarahNet Radio and like Kevin Scholla. Palin Patriots is our feature on SarahNet.net. You can check out the writings from our great panel of contributors, including Martha Zoller and Bader Carmoot. And I'm doing some writing for Breitbart News. Just go to Breitbart.com and search Kevin Scholla. Also, this past week, Governor Palin writing a couple of op-eds for Breitbart. Check those out as well. I want to thank Sarah Steelman, Susan Stimson, and everyone here at SarahNet Radio. Thanks to Peter Schweizer, and thank you for listening today. Please be sure to join us again next time for another edition of the Palin Update. I'm Kevin Scholla. Have a pleasant day.